Hi guys, it is time for a little teacher space today, and I thought we would come to the mat for some spine stretch. It's one of my favorites because as a teacher, I don't know if you feel this way, it's very challenging to understand and get as a client and focus on, but as a teacher, what we're looking at is that continuation of this evenness of the spine curl, of the flexion of that spine, that maybe we saw a little bit of it in the 100, we saw some in the roll up, we saw it in the rollover, and now we're seeing it for the very first time with them sitting and nice and tall and really lengthening and extending as they come back. So if you think about our spine and how naturally we are, I mean, our upper, that is really already in that position of going there. This is not. So this is really where we kind of want to get that whole backline connection here with it, and make sure you can see me. So one thing you want to really think about is we don't have anything except our bodies here. There's no spring to kind of feed back. We've got that, well, we can take it later. But we've got this mat, we've got our hands. And so you can think about just taking your hands and your fingers, don't break them, and just kind of pressing into the mat, almost like you think, I'm gonna like lift myself off this mat. And the minute you push in and you feel that length up, right? Because that's what we want, but we want that to continue as we spine stretch forward. So we're pressing in and we're growing tall. And then it's just taking the hands forward, and traditionally it was here on the mat. And then the chin's gonna drop and the head's gonna come down. And then the minute this happens, this happens. And so we're curling at both ends at the same time. And what you wanna do is keep that evenness as we go. And I'm just gonna go, I'm super tight today, where I can go. And it's not about like, oh, it's a stretch. It's about creating that length and that spine stretch at the same time, instead of like collapsing, which is what you see a lot in the rollover and the roll up. People just kind of whoosh, collapse. I'm guilty of it. Rib cage container kind of just goes in. So what we want to think about instead of this, right, is that coming up as we go into that spine stretch, and also not letting our upper collapse and just kind of fold in. We're also looking at those legs and that back connection, right? So the length of that. And I always tell people, just kind of think about the back of your knees reaching and lengthening into your mat. And one thing to think about, and it's just off the top of my head here, is those hyperextended. You know how sometimes they'll straighten their legs and I can't do it. Their feet, their heels will float up, right? Because they're hyperextending here. So that's something to look for, which you'll see that pattern go, obviously, because they're hyperextending throughout the work. But you can think about that cue of just lengthening the back of your knees into the mat, but not pushing them into the mat. They're just lengthening them, and that will kind of take that away. What you don't want to do is tell them to soften their knees, because that's going to lose a lot of that muscle activity there. So basically with our spine stretch, we're seeing where they can go and how that spine is rounding now that their legs are apart and they're sitting tall. And for someone who's super tight, right, that they're not going to be able to be tall. That's a challenge there. So obviously that gives you a lot of information. But the spine stretch is one of those. I had a client and it just was this moment of over and over, it's like, I don't get it, I don't understand, I don't get it. But they don't need to get it, right? You just need, as a teacher, to see what's happening when you're asking this of the body. What choices is it making here? And how can you see a pattern that already started, or maybe something shows up here and you're like, oh, that's interesting. They really do kind of like fall back, or they don't engage their legs, or they're not, walking their fingers out, just kind of not pushing and not lifting, just kind of collapsing into it. So the spine stretch is a lovely moment to really not get too nitpicky, but just kind of see what happens and give those cues of pushing into the mat, growing tall each time, head towards the sky, and kind of watching all these little moments with the legs, activities of the arm, creating space. But that's just a little look at the spine stretch. Have a good day. Bye.